Now, detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The 7 mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
It almost feels like we've been shifted into an alternate reality over the last 5 months of 2020. As we record this at the end of May 2020, the world has been turned on its head, turned upside down. Where are we going from here, and how closely can we read the fulfillment of prophecy into what's going on in the world around us? This will be a freewheeling conversation, I'm sure. We're just praying the Holy Spirit leads us into, in a way that this all makes sense, but leads us to some better understanding, but also encouragement. Our guest joining us via Skype from across the pond is a very gifted filmmaker and a man with a real gift of insight and discernment into seeing what's happening in the political realm around us. And of course, the political realm is nothing more than the physical manifestation of the war that we see in the principality, among the principalities and powers in the spirit realm. Joining us from the UK is, and you'll find him online, his website, marksutherland.org, is Mark Sutherland. Thank you for joining us today, Mark.
Derek, it's an absolute pleasure and a real privilege to have this conversation. And it's lovely to talk to you again, having the last time we met was in March in Dallas, which
was about the last time we were both free to travel without restriction, more or less. It was strange because that was just about the last weekend before everything got clamped down here in the United States. And we've not, absolutely. So at least 2 of the conferences we were supposed to have attended since then have rescheduled and become virtual, or become virtual. So things are really odd. So not only do we have the coronavirus pandemic spreading about and causing disruption in a number of ways. We can't move about freely. Over the last 10 weeks now, we're at nearly 41 million Americans have filed for unemployment compensation. The United States Treasury and the Federal Reserve Bank have been sending out free money, and they'll put that in air quotes because, there is no free lunch, free money, including to those of us who don't really need it, which to me just kind of makes me scratch my head. It's like, okay, they're not means testing this. So what's the purpose of all that? And then we're seeing political and social disruption around the world. Just within the last 24 hours of this recording, the Chinese have basically clamped down on Hong Kong. President Trump has responded by saying we're going to eliminate the special status that we've given Hong Kong in the United States as far as trade and travel. We're seeing he's just announced this afternoon as we record this on Saturday, March 30th, that the United States is withdrawing from the World Health Organization. And because of a case of blatant police brutality earlier this week in Minneapolis, Minnesota, that resulted in the death of an African-American man, George Floyd, we've got violent protests breaking out all across the United States, some of which appear to be deliberately set, as in one example, a video that's gone viral of somebody in Dallas who pointed out, there's a pallet load of bricks that have been dropped here on the side of the street, and there's no construction anywhere nearby. So it certainly seems like there are agents provocateur that are trying to take advantage of this. Mark, what is going on in the UK right now?
It's very interesting. I'll just make a comment about that. I mean, that's very interesting what you were saying about Dallas, and I'd heard that as well. And then there has been these other cases where a man with an umbrella and a gas mask on, and there he is smashing glass, and then people are challenging him, saying, "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" on AutoZone. And then other people with timber and all this kind of thing seem to be moving equipment in. And then, as I have heard from friends on your side of the pond, that it seems that a number of these people that are rioting are from out of various areas. And I'm trying to work out why attacking a Louis Vuitton luggage has got to do with, sadly, with the death of that particular individual. What is going on in the UK? Well, it's interesting because we're observing that. Those of us that are paying attention to events are observing that. What is going on in the UK is that we have this lockdown, as you know, Derek, and then we're trying to ease this. Our figures, out of half of the working population in this country, we have a population of 68 million. I can't think what the working population of that is off the top of my head right now, but put it this way, that particular figure means that half that working population are now reliant on a government handout. So as I know myself, I've seen my then work completely, go off a cliff like many others. Small businesses shut down, et cetera, et cetera. In April, we then helicoptered, printed money of 65 billion, which is what we were supposed to be printing, borrowing, whichever way you want to look at it, for the whole year. We actually did that in a month, Derek. And I think it'd be a really, really good idea to recap on something that I think is fundamentally important. Because when we last saw each other, and then suddenly, the flights were shut down, in many ways, I didn't personally see it coming in this particular way. And I want to say that because I reacted when flights were stopped. I felt it was like a sucker punch to my stomach because I just thought, well, hold on a minute. You're telling me I can't get on a plane and do international flights anymore, etc. This restriction. Then I discovered through a dear friend of mine over here that on the 19th of March on a UK government website, we had downgraded this coronavirus from a highly infectious, a high consequence infectious disease, HCID, down to a not so high consequence infectious disease on the 19th of March. And we then could say that we went officially into lockdown on the 26th of March. Mm-hmm. Why you would then do that once as a government that you have downgraded, the importance of that is the big question. And of course, as we now know a number of facts, and I'll come to Ferguson's models in a minute, then I understand that Fauci, or Dr. Fiasco, as L.A. Marzulli likes to call him, that on the which I love, on the 24th of March, said in a New England magazine that maybe it's going to be no more than a high flu pandemic within the US. So to give people an idea, so we have a population of 68 million. You have a population of 330 million. The UK will fit geographically into Texas just under 3 times, right? So that's important to say, along with, there are twice as many cows as human beings in Montana. It's trying to give a sort of an overview of the size of your great nation, So Fauci said that. We did what we did on the government website. And I remember I read that out on Facebook. And I'd just like to say everyone's aware of the censoring that's going on. I'm censored at the moment from doing any Facebook lives. Twitter, of course, has been censoring friends of mine. Other people are being censored all over the place in regard to YouTube, Vimeo, etc. So this is all real. It's all affecting us. This is not a film. This is not a drama. This is reality. So suddenly on the 26th of March, we entered into this experiment of communism, as far as I'm concerned, of restricting movements. The only thing I haven't been given, and God forbid, is suddenly, where are your papers, sir? Where are you going? And the fact that we're now, this whole thing of discussing track and trace, in my mobile, blah-de-blah. Have you got the infection? It's just off the wall and off the charts as far as I'm concerned. So we then structurally built temporary hospitals. You would be aware of all the sort of TikTok videos of nurses and doctors who don't seem to have enough to do doing dance routines.
Right.
which is a bit of an interesting one, because I will say this. In this pandemic, and I use that term deliberately because I go back to October 2001 in New York, we then have to put in another figure, another point where we have to remember that there was a huge military games of all the armies in the world got together and had their own type of Olympics. That happened in Wuhan as well. We then, other things that come out, I then discover through incredible work like the amazing Polly that we as a nation have been given money to the Wuhan virology lab. There was an article that affirmed that, saying in November 2018, affirming our contribution to that. And also in that same article that she then found, the article then confirmed the fact that that China, the China Health Organization there, were overseeing to help set up the equivalent of the CDC in Africa as well. Then we have the other stuff that's rather interesting over the last few days, pointing to the fact that Barnier, who we are negotiating with in regard to the EU, so we have to throw these factors in as well, Derek, because this is a load of bait and switch and people taking advantage of these situations, e.g., like where you are on your side of the pond, you've got various states like I think Michigan, California, and Oklahoma, where, for our argument's sake, there are others where people, we don't want to unlock these. We want all these draconian measures as everyone is experimenting in socialism and Marxism and communism. Mm-hmm. So all of that is going on, and we have our own thing that's going on in the background. So let's start off with, if we look at the fact that, so Fauci gives $3.75 million. It's come out where he gave that to the Wuhan laboratory 2014, 2015, that kind of financing. We then see the fact that we as a nation have been financing the WHO as well, the World Health Organization, run by an individual that used to be part of the Tigray political party, which was a Marxist organization, which I believe that your country in 1990 or 92, and I still need to get that fact right, recognized Tigray as a terrorist organization. So we then discover all the links with China and the WHO. We then over here, we have got, of course, we have the historical links in the past with Hong Kong because it was one of our perpetuates, etc. It was ours, and then we handed that over to the Chinese in the 90s, and I can't think of that particular date off the top of my head either, so I apologize. But then, so we have all of these different factors going on, and then we discover where money is going, who is financing things, why we are then financing Gavi, the sort of global strategic, global alliance for vaccines and immunization. I start to discover that. In this country, we have this SAGE group, this special advisory group for scientific emergencies. I then discover through people like Amazing Polly, other people doing researches, looking up yourself, you then discover that the people in that group, they've got links with Gavi, they've got links with Mr. Bill Hellgates and all this kind of thing. And all this starts to come to fruition, starts to raise its ugly head. And we then discover that terms like mandatory vaccinations, the health minister. So just need to say this. Over here, we have a public body. We have public health care, the National Health Service. So it's a national health service. It's paid through the taxes that people pay in this country. It's a bit like, and I would like to point this out, it's a bit like the BBC. The BBC the Bias Broadcasting Corporation, as far as I would call it, is financed. Is financed. Yes, I know they make Doctor Who, which we all love. However,
well, until the last 2 seasons, anyway.
Until the last 2 seasons,
right?
And I completely agree with you, because suddenly we see this collective progressive. We see all of these things being pushed, and for those of us that are awake, so those of us that are just slight different tangent, but for those that are aware of cultural Marxism, we're aware of the Frankfurt School, we're aware of the Fabian Society, suddenly having all this rammed at us through our, television shows that we used to enjoy at various times is a little bit of an insult. And of course, it just sets off massive antennas in us in paying attention.
Right.
But the BBC is taxed. You pay £157 a year for the privilege of having them. And, so that's another thing. So we have all of this going on. So here's another important thing I want to say, because the BBC, the propaganda that you have on the other side of the pond there. I mean, I feel as though I'm living in the film They Live by John Carpenter, to say the least. I won't say where I was going. But I'm on the motorway, the freeway, and I'm watching signs that say, obey, stay at home, protect the National Health Service,
right.
Submit. And on the back of They Live, I've actually got the film here. It goes, obey, submit, consume, watch TV, do not question authority. Money is your God, no independent thought, no imagination. They live, we sleep. Doesn't that sound familiar?
Yeah.
But the big thing that's gone on is that, and the lead up to where we are now, is that Boris Johnson was definitely heading for immunity, herd immunity. Mm-hmm. On your side of the pond, there is no doubt about it, that President Trump was doing exactly the same. Now, we then, it turned on a dime, as you say on your side of the pond. We'll say it, turned on a penny here, but it turned on a dime where there was a bit of a crisis in one of our hospitals just outside North London, or in North London, and that suddenly the emergency room there was suddenly inundated with lots of people. Now, Boris Johnson had won an election on the 12th of December. Now, he has been the poster boy in regard to us leaving the EU, right? And I'll come to that, and I forgot to make this particular point. Barnier, who we are negotiating with, also, it looks like, was responsible as the French foreign minister, according to the Daily Express. Not everyone would go, you can't believe what appear in the Daily Express, because they say that because they perceive it as right wing. That Barnier oversaw giving money to the Wuhan virology lab, if not maybe setting it up, money to help set that up. So I'd like to throw that out there as well. Because all of these figures, all of these layers within layers within layers have all been at this for a long, long time. And as you quite rightly said, Ephesians 6 is what we are referring to. This is the spiritual battle. And when people say to me on a regular occasion, I'm not interested in politics. Okay, fine, that's fine. But I'm afraid that if you're not interested in politics and you're not interested in praying about it and you're not interested in observing what's going on, these people are making decisions that are affecting your life. And there is no doubt about it, as we found, and you and I have, discussed this before, when in 2016, on the 23rd of June, 17,410,752 people, with a majority of over 1 million, voted out to leave the EU, we then had to fight our own parliament, our own MPs, our own House of Lords for 4 years nearly to eventually get to the point where Boris Johnson won a clear majority of 80 seats. And this is why it's important. And this is why the National Health Service is important, is tied in that. He won seats in areas in the middle of this country. He won a seat in Sedgley that had been held by Labour ever since that seat was created in many ways for years and years and years, for the whole of the 20th century. Now,
that's remarkable.
which is remarkable.
That'd be like a Republican winning the mayor, becoming mayor of the city of Chicago. That just ain't going to happen.
I hear you. Good, very, very good point. Absolutely. So he burst through what's called the Red Wall, right, which is the Labour wall. So he then gets this 80-seat majority. Margaret Thatcher, a higher power had over 100 seats majority. So he didn't do too bad. And he was going around the country, leave means leave, that's it, talking to fishing communities and all the rest. So he got a massive support from the Midlands and in various seats up north. That's very, very important, because to Boris Johnson, his political ideology says that he is a one nation Tory, that he will rule, slip of the tongue, that he will be prime minister for this country, for the whole of this country. He wants to represent the whole of the country. And to be fair, in 2016, there is no doubt about it, that President Trump said exactly the same. Mm-hmm. Even if you hate me, I want to represent you and do the best for this nation for you. Now, that ideology of a one nation Tory, that ideology of the fact that the National Health Service is the huge political football that the left kick the right with all the time. Now, we can get into some, huge debate, which I think is really, really important, where we're handing over our health to a public body instead of taking responsibility for that ourselves, is an issue over here to me. And one of the big things is that the National Health Service, Derek, is the third biggest employer in the world.
Wow.
And so it helped. Yeah. That is out of a population, right, in this country of 68 million. I'm describing a country that fits into Texas nearly 3 times, right?
Yeah.
That is quite an incredible, because one of the other biggest employers is the Chinese army. So I think, we're behind there. So to put things in context. So suddenly there was this panic. So you bear in mind that the 19th of March, the corona, the high consequence infection disease had been downgraded. Then suddenly there's a run on a hospital in regards to people using it. There was a panic within the government. And this is what I feel. And having listened to incredible people, we have a wonderful historian over here called David Starkey, who laid this out. And at the same time, Macron, Mr. I want to be emperor of the world. He turns emperor of the world, and I'm having a Napoleon complex all over again. He turns round and says to Boris, you've got to do something about it, e.g. stop either people coming into France or slap down on movement and all this kind of thing. I mean, yes, Mr. Macron, you need to actually stop the movement of immigrants coming through France and getting into dinghies and then coming over the channel. But I won't, we'll pick that fight on another occasion with him. But that is a huge issue, and having your boats escort these boats to halfway across the channel and then handing over to our border police. I mean, that's another issue. That is a huge issue, because there's been a big number of this going on over the channel. So there was this panic, and they then asked, Health England to do something, etc., etc. And then suddenly from nowhere came the clampdown, and they built all these temporary hospitals. And these temporary hospitals, and I will get shot by some people over here, exocet missiles coming in, already, have not been used.
Yeah, we saw the same thing here in the United States with temporary hospitals set up that basically went unused. And the irony, of course, is that in New York City, one of those hospitals was set up by Franklin Graham's ministry, Samaritan's Purse, and the biggest concern of lawmakers in New York was that this is a Christian organization and they don't hold the correct view on LGBT rights, and so we don't want this hospital here. Okay.
So what are we saying? That what they're saying, that if someone went in with they're turning around and saying, well, we're gay, but we're not very well, that means they're going to turn them away from Samaritan's Purse? I don't think so. I mean, that's just mad. I mean, Mr. Cuomo there, he's got bigger issues in justifying why why he then sent a number of people back to their nursing homes and all this kind of issue.
Yes, that is correct. As someone with an 83-year-old mother who lives in a retirement community, that was something that thankfully our governor here in the state of Missouri did not do. But having the correct position on favorite sexual preferences was more important than we've got a group here that's willing to come in and offer free health care that we might need. It turned out it wasn't needed, but this is the world in which we live.
Absolutely, along with putting boats into the New York harbor there. But this is this is the typical Salalinsky thing, isn't it? Of constant division.
Exactly right.
And the whole thing is being played out, that principality. And I want to come back to that if I can, but just say, continue with an update in a sense. So that's our background. We then went into the lockdown because Neil Ferguson of Imperial College, Imperial College has taken millions and millions of dollars, pounds, shekels, whatever, from Bill Gates. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has taken millions from them. Now, when they stand up either side of Boris Johnson, the chief medical officer, Whitty, someone else called Valance, they have history. They have links to, sort of things like Global Alliance initiatives on vaccines, etc. They would have links to GlaxoSmithKline and all this kind of thing. All of that has to be put out there. The amazing Polly, in her last number of documentaries, has unearthed all that in her videos. That information, I'm saying that deliberately to say to people, go and research it, go and find out. Do not accept anything that I say. Go and do your own research. Listen while you're doing whatever you're doing at work, washing up, whatever. Listen to this stuff, because this is what's going on. Now, Whitty, our chief medical officer, was given, I believe, up to, I think, £40 million by Bill and Melinda Gates to look into malaria when he was in Africa and all this kind of thing. I'm not saying that malaria isn't important. It is important. It's very interesting, isn't it? Because I think the word hydroxychloroquine comes in there somewhere along the line, which is rather interesting. And having been in Africa and taken my anti-malaria pills, I'm grateful for that. So we have got all these links that I think is nefarious, frankly. Now, Neil Ferguson, who has previously got foot and mouth wrong, who has previously cost he got bird flu wrong figures, foot and mouth. He cost the economy of this nation £10 billion. I think in regard to either SARS or MERS, he turns around and says, there's going to be 4 million people across the world that are going to die. And then it turned out to be 18,500. So he then creates these models. He is not very reliable. Right? And for some reason, this government then decided to listen to Imperial College. Now, that's partly because when you may turn around and you say to me, yes, but Boris Johnson is a conservative government. Well, one of the things that we have found out, especially within our fight over Brexit, is that no, it's a very broad church full of quite a lot of liberal progressives as well. So I'll just throw that out there. So it's a bit like, I suppose, the rhinos, Republican in name only, a bit like where we discovered our linos, leave in name only. But according to Theresa May, I'll hand over the negotiations to Ollie Robinson, who wrote essays when he was at university, just talking about the delights of Stalin. And then she handed it over to him, who then, in my opinion, was negotiating on behalf of the EU how we as a country should actually leave a bloc that we actually surrendered our sovereignty to in 1973. So that's another little thing to throw out there. So Ferguson comes along. He then says to the government, there's going to be 500,000 deaths. What do you mean there's going to be 500,000 deaths? We need to do something about that. Then within 9 days, I believe, of either the shutdown. He then said, oh, no, it's going to be maybe no more than 20,000. Now, I'm not the most greatest of mathematicians, Derek, but I think even I could say that there is a big difference between 500,000 and 20,000.
Right.
It's got a few more noughts on the end. Then those models were then used for Fauci and Birx, or Tony and Debbie, as I call them over here, to then march in to the White House, to the Oval Office, and go, Mr. President, there's going to be 2 million deaths in America due to coronavirus. What? Well, I've got to do something. Now, to his credit, he took the information, he did what he could do. Maybe you could say that about, to be fair, maybe about our government as well. But in no time in history, in the history of this nation, have we decided to sacrifice the economy, shove it off a cliff, and quarantine all the healthy in all their homes, right? I mean, I had an incident today because, frankly, I don't adhere to it. I don't accept it. I had an incident today. I went to see someone, and they said, "Well, no, social distancing." I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I said, "Look, this is no higher than a high flu pandemic. I'm not saying that something hasn't come out of the lab in Wuhan, but we have massively overreacted, because when Ferguson said 20,000, just before that at Oxford, there was another model which totally revitalized that and downplayed those figures, say the figures should be a lot lower. But when you actually, as a government, have turned around and said the high consequences of infectious disease is already being downplayed. We've already downgraded that to the 19th, on the 19th of March, even though we've gone into lockdown. Now we've completely wrecked various businesses and all the rest in this country and put everyone's life, including mine, it seems like on hold for 8 weeks. This is ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. So Fauci does the same. I referred to the article on the 24th. And then all these models have been found to be completely and utterly erroneous. And as you have reported, Neil Ferguson, then there he is, part of the SAGE group over here, going lockdown, everyone must stay in their home, obey, do this, not do that, social distancing. And then he decides to disobey social distancing by his girlfriend, who's married, gets on a train, leaves, I think, Islington, and then goes up to Oxford to see him. Now, she is an interesting case because she, I believe, was part of a group called Azazu or something that had links to Al Gore, that has links to Gordon Brown. Remember Gordon Brown, Al Gore, Mr. Climate Change Erroneous. He's there. Gordon Brown, our previous prime minister, then saying, we must have a temporary world government. Excuse me?
Yeah, he's been pushing for the New World Order for a long time. I mean, he used that phrase more often than George H.W. Bush, who was probably more famous for it.
You are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. And what I find really, really fascinating, and this is like, I have to go to America to get hold of certain facts, or then I have discussions with you, discussions with others, where you're talking about these things. You'll talk about, I mean, I'm aware, but you'll freely talk about the New World Order, which freely talk about, the UN. Yes, fully over here. I mean, people like Bill Jasper wrote a fantastic book called Step by Step to Global Tyranny in 1992. There are other books like that, but it's not embedded in our culture. That's partly, I believe, because since the Second World War, we've had such a mixture of socialism and to some extent, and of course, free market capitalism and all this. And you until recently, even though various people want to bring that in, you then completely have a different view on that. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is the American dream. That's what this is about. That's what it's about. So unless we actually study the foundations of your nation and why that came about and the importance of that, then we have no understanding of that over here. And then it just reminds me how unfree at times I particularly feel. But Gordon Brown, absolutely, the son of a Presbyterian Scottish minister, pushing that, one of the worst prime ministers we've ever had, sold our gold off really, really cheaply, spent most of his time as Chancellor of the Exchequer under Tony Blair, trying to undermine Blair all the time. Now, it's interesting when we start to reflect on things because, and I need to look at that because this is what most probably was happening before, but under Blair's government, the whole thing of private-public partnerships to create, new hospitals and all this kind of thing was bringing privatization in, where private companies would be making a lot of money or be paying the interest on that. The other thing that has to be noted is how much, Gordon Brown was such a sycophant in regard to the Clinton Foundation and was giving money to the Clinton Foundation. To be fair, Andrew Mitchell, an ex-Tory minister as well, also gave money. Now, our Department of Overseas Development, I'll just say this, that was the department that gave money to the Wuhan lab as well. Now, in 2007, I think 2007-8, trying to get that figure right. David Cameron, when we had promised, no, it wouldn't be 2007, maybe 2014, 13, 14, but we won't worry about that date. But when he was in prime minister, he had definitely changed the policy to say that we as a nation will be giving 0.7% of our GDP away. And then overnight to a Swiss-based global vaccine group had given, millions of pounds of taxpayers' money to do that overnight. And the reason why I'm saying this is that we have to remember that all these people that had what they would call a mindset of the third way over here, which is a third way of combining, and I see it now, combining private and public money and bringing that together, along with the fact that we have seen such an immerse of left-wing ideology in our schools, in our universities, and I believe within our media. And I just want to throw all of that out in regard to what has gone on in regard to this whole thing of the pushing for the one world government and the global government. Mm-hmm. So going back to Neil Ferguson, going back to his girlfriend who was connected with this group, and I'm certain that Mr. Soros is floating around in the background, is this whole progressive collectivism mindset. And I believe that Ferguson comes from that himself. Now, how people have gone back to him when he's got his models so wrong, frankly, that is such a mystery. It really is. But so he had to leave the Sage Group because of that particular behavior. So coming right up to date, say on a political angle, and it involves the whole thing of the European Union and etc., the fact that when we voted to get out, Dominic Cummings has been in the press. I don't know if it's hit on your side of the pond, but Dominic Cummings is basically Boris Johnson's number one advisor. Mm-hmm. Dominic Cummings has family up County Durham, up north in the country. Now, he was part of the Leave EU campaign, etc., etc. Now, the civil service in this country absolutely hate him. You and I have discussed this subject before. I think I've discussed it with you and Sharon before when we'd seen each other face to face, when I talked about a group called Common Purpose. Common Purpose, right. Precisely. Now, Common Purpose, which in 2011, the brilliant David Gerrish, who runs the fantastic show over here called UK Column, where real news is talked about, is the fact that Common Purpose was set up in 1989 and by Julia Middleton. And it was set up and it came out of Community Action Group theology in America. Does that sound familiar? Community organizers, yes. Community organizers, ACORN, right. And Mr. Barack Hussein Obama, the 44th president of the United States, Bill Ayers, who came, Bill Ayers, the whole thing, who came from nowhere, and all that, and who as we say, Bill Ayers launched Barack Hussein Obama's political career on his sofa in his house.
Mm-hmm.
These are important things to say. These are important things to do, because when we talk about the spiritual battle and the principalities and the powers and how it is manipulating things and manipulating people. So Julia Middleton set this up, and she then had a office most probably from 1997, it must have been. Blair had a, vice prime minister, deputy prime minister called John Prescott. John Prescott has a lot of a background in shipping unions. He worked on a ship and his union, then he became a member of parliament, etc. So I thought it would be a good idea where Blair, looked this third way socialist member of the Fabian Society. He's down, in the London bubble. And even though he had a seat in Sedgley, and I think it was his Sedgley seat, and then John Prescott up north. She had an office inside John Prescott's office, which is astounding, because Common Purpose uses neuro-linguistic programming. Common Purpose then ran management training and it still does, within the NHS, I believe, within the BBC, those kind of bodies. These huge public bodies. So the BBC, in charge of our, has this huge media platform, National Health Service. And it then encourages people in training to think beyond their borders, to think beyond their authority, to think beyond the authority of the organization or the departments that they're working on. I mean, I've never heard so much claptrap, but it's so serious, because the serious when people were jumping all over the place. But when Trudeau, or Trudeau, as friends of ours like to call him in Canada, because we wonder where the brain cells are, the fact is that Trudeau in Canada, and I'm not being rude to any Canadians, I care passionately for Canada, and I care passionately politically where it's going.
Amen. Yes.
As with dear friends of ours that who are there, who are absolutely pulling their hair out with what's going on, as this man is not listening to the people, and he has created a mindset within himself that says, I am leading a post-nation nation. Common Purpose, it's very interesting, isn't it? Common Purpose, Communist Party. Must be quite deliberate. It creates a mindset of getting people to think beyond national barriers, think beyond the nation state, and to then, it's all about, Europe, federalism. And just to remind that, the European Union took the Betty Ross flag from you to create that same flag, because the European Union wants to be the federal, well, it is in a sense now, but we're trying to leave the federal states of Europe. So you've got all this. You've got this kind of thinking within our civil servants. You've got that kind of thinking of people from the BBC. And when you have MPs and various members of parliament, and I'm thinking of one right now, someone like Ben Bradshaw, who used to work at the BBC. Maybe he did a Common Purpose training school thing there. I don't know. But he is definitely a Remainer and all this. It's how people get their particular thoughts. This is the whole point I'm saying. Now, the reason why Dominic Cummings is so important is because Dominic Cummings wants to take a root and branch axe, basically an axe to the civil service, and chop it up. Because it's about challenging the mindset. We had been at war for nearly 4 years with our own parliament. Now, we have a very famous BBC television comedy called Yes Minister that was during the 80s. Absolutely brilliant.
And we love it here on this side of the pond. Sharon and I, our favorite television comes from from Britain. So
brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, the Yes Minister, as you will know, is absolutely brilliant. Because basically you've got this civil servant, Sir Humphrey, explaining to the Prime Minister, or explaining to the Minister, and then he became Prime Minister, yes, Minister, well, we can't really do that. Well, why can't we do that? Because basically it's the civil service run the country. And this is the whole point. And, that you will be in this job, Minister, for a couple of years, and then you'll be given another portfolio. Now, that is why suddenly our government has been passionate about, certain things in regard to the NHS. I mean, Matt Hancock, who's the health minister, I wonder how long he's going to last after this pandemic is over. So Dominic Cummings got into trouble because he got in a car after overseeing, stay at home, all of this kind of thing. He got in a car and drove 264 miles to County Durham so he could be with his parents. His parents could help with childcare. He was separately in a house and all this. And there has been over the last week and a half an absolute onslaught by the press in this country, who are left-wing, who are Remainers, because they want his guts. Now, there are one or two people, I will say, that are actually pro-leave that also think that Dominic Cummings should have gone. I know, and I don't want him to go at all. He's actually facing this down, and in many ways, you can argue and say, I don't think he's broken any letter of certain advisory rules, right? Mm-hmm. It has completely gone off the charts, and the reason by it being is because he promoted leave, and they want his head on an absolute platter. Mm-hmm. They want him so badly that it will mean that when a BBC presenter called Emily Maitlis, who then is on Newsnight a couple of nights ago, which is our prime sort of political speaking television program every night, then basically gave her opening gambit was so biased, in my opinion. It was literally saying, come on, everybody, we need Dominic Cummings' head on a plate. Now, of course, those people that are Remainers would profoundly disagree with me, but that's because they seem to have a problem with democracy. You are a constitutional representative republic. Mm-hmm. We are with an electoral college. I'm saying this for a reason, with an electoral college for a very, very important reason. Even if when the Democrats, when Hillary and all these other idiots want to actually go, we'll get rid of the electoral college. The electoral college is absolutely crucial, is what the founding fathers put in that. It's absolutely crucial, mm-hmm. because otherwise the smaller states are going to be downtrodden by the bigger states, and it would mean that New York, Washington and LA would just be choosing your president for infinitum.
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying that to show off, to say that I know I'm trying to understand your politics. I'm saying that because I am passionate about your country and I care very deeply for it. And I'm trying and alert to what is going on. EG is trying to educate people to say, this is why those checks and balances are in. And once those checks and balances are abused, then we have chaos. Over here, that's why Dominic Cummings has to attack the civil service. We have to question, also the House of Lords, which is so pro-Remain. We then have to look at our judiciary as well. And we've had, over the last number of years, we've had things overturned in regard to us leaving. So all of this is playing out. And that's been the biggest political scandal. Now, the other thing that is rather interesting, which is Gavi, the Alliance, formerly the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, is having a virtual conference on the 4th of June here in this country. Mm-hmm. And Boris Johnson is supposed to be overseeing this. We'll then have most probably Mr. Bill Gates on there as well, right? Mm-hmm. Now, this, Bill Gates, it needs to be tracked in regard to money that he's giving to Gavi, money that he's giving to Imperial College, money that he's been given to other groups like this, right? Because this is so important, because this man has he's got no doctorate. He's not a medical doctor whatsoever, no qualifications whatsoever. And suddenly, because he learned how to put viruses on his own flipping software and computers, he now thinks he's a medical expert. And he can now tell you and I, you've got to have a vaccine. Well, this is a family show, so I will not say what is on my mind, and I have to repent of that. But the bottom line is this, is how dare he? And also, we then have to join the dots. We have to join the dots up with Fauci, who Fauci is married to, who Fauci's wife then has access to in regard to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the fact that Fauci has been there for 5 administrations, et cetera, et cetera. We have to join all of these dots up. And suddenly, I heard it today, that the Labour Party are going, right, well, the opposition, we don't think this track and trace app is coming out quick enough. Well, no, we don't need it. And do not ask me to put it on my phone, because I won't be, and nor will a lot of other people in this country. And I want to make a point about this, which is really fascinating to me. Absolutely fascinating. I am encouraged when I look at certain videos, when I look at conversations, the number of people that I then follow or just pay attention. In this country, people are waking up. They are waking up to the science. They are waking up into for vaccinations and all the rest. Because if you then turn around and go, right, we're going to create a vaccination. Do you know what? We're going to rush it through. So we're not going to have this kind of placebo. We're not going to have these tests. In fact, do you know what? We're going to create a vaccine in 18 months where normally it take 40, 50 years or something. Right? This is outrageous. No wonder we've got rid of all the health and safety body in this country, because there's going to be no checks and balances in regard to that. So all of this is in the mix. And suddenly, again, the call on the Prime Minister is this whole social distancing thing. This now needs to stop, because there'll be so many people made unemployed in this country. You see, the businesses that will have gone to the wall, the businesses that will not be coming back, same with you on your side of the pond, we don't fully know that yet, because many people have been furloughed. And now the Chancellor of the Exchequer is now saying, well, now those businesses, you've got to pay national insurance for your employees. Well, how can these businesses do that if they haven't got any cash flow coming through the door? So I know I'm going all over the place, but there is a real mix of all of that discussion that's going on at the moment. And for those people in the media bubble who are getting their very, very nice salaries, thank you very much indeed, they have no idea the consequences of people on the ground who are suffering through this. And I would just like to say and put this out there. As far as I'm concerned, shutting down the country was not what we should have done at all. And if you base that on the models that Mr. Ferguson put forward, then you definitely should not have done that at all.
Yeah. In the interest of keeping this to a relatively manageable time length for listeners, I want to go, see if we can bring this around and put a cap on it within the next 10 or 15 minutes if we can. But let me suggest this. As we're looking at the economic relief, the financial relief that's been sent out by governments here in the United States, they rushed out $1,200 relief checks so quickly, basically sent them to anyone who filed a tax return for the year 2019, or in the year 2019, that is. Some of those people have passed on since then. So we were sending checks to the dead, which the Internal Revenue Service then requested that family members, knowing, if one of your deceased family members has received a check, please return it to the United States Treasury. Apparently, they only want the dead to vote, not to receive any financial relief, here in the United States. But the Federal Reserve Bank, in the interest of propping up the stock market, and this is where we get to, I think, the real beneficiaries of the financial relief. I just completed writing a chapter for a book that Sharon and I are working on, tentatively titled Hoofbeats, about the riders of the apocalypse. Began with a look at whether or not the COVID-19 outbreak was evidence of the rider on the pale horse, the fourth rider of the apocalypse. She'd written a book back in 2014 during the Ebola outbreak called Ebola and the Fourth Horseman of the Apocalypse. But rather than tie it specifically to COVID-19, we wanted to make this a little more evergreen. And so we broadened it out and looking at the other riders as well and what they represent, just, as a tease for listeners, it's actually applying divine counsel theology to the riders of the apocalypse. If John saw fit to name the rider on the pale horse Thanatos, death, that was a known entity to the pagan world in the ancient Near East, then who were the other three riders? And if you've been watching our series Unraveling Revelation, you already know who we think they are. Last night put the finishing touches on the first draft of the chapter on the rider on the third horse, which is the rider on the black horse who's carrying the scales, except that the word translated scales in Greek is zygos. And every other place it's used in the New Testament, zygos is translated as yoke, as in what you put around the neck of your oxen while they're treading out the grain, walking in a circle, milling the grain for its masters. And I think what we're seeing in all of this is it's not just the one rider. It's not just the rider on the pale horse pandemic. We've had pandemics throughout history. I think we're seeing the procedure by which a majority of the world's population will be convinced or lured or induced to willingly place their necks inside this zygos, this economic yoke. Yes. I think most scholars who've looked at this and look at this rider on the black horse assume that it means famine, because it talks about a day's wages, or a denarius, which was the day's wages for a laborer, for a quart of wheat, and a denarius, day's wages for 3 quarts of barley. In other words, a day's wages to get just enough grain to survive for a day, because that's about what, a day's worth of wheat was about enough nutrition to keep somebody alive for a day. Now, here in the United States, where we've got people pushing, activists pushing for a $15 hourly wage.
That's right.
Okay. It's a nice round number. So let's add that up. Okay. Multiply that times 8, take out 30% for taxes. You got $84 take home pay, $84 to buy enough bread to get you by for one day for you, not counting your wife or husband or children, leaving nothing for housing, medical expenses, transportation, anything else, clothing, forget all that. And don't take your weekends off, because if you want to eat Friday, Saturday and Sunday, you better work 7 days a week. That's okay. That is sort of the economic treadmill that is implied, famine, poverty, but also this economic servitude that I think was typical of the late Roman Republic and the early Roman Empire, where the what was it called? The cure. Oh gosh. Anyway, care of the grain dole, care of the grain allocation is how it translates into English, but the grain dole. And I've even found archaeological evidence that the ancient kingdom of Uruk in the ancient Near East, which would be the period from about 3800 to 3100 BC, post-flood, pre-Babel, up to and including Babel, the kingdom of Nimrod, its most defining characteristic, according to archaeologists, is the presence of something called the bevel-rimmed bowl. It's a very simple clay bowl that looks like a kid made it with Play-Doh, but they have found so many of them that's how they identify, oh yes, this is an Uruk period site. Well, this was the kingdom that dominated everything from the Persian Gulf to the Taurus Mountains in Turkey along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers during the days of Nimrod. And yet these bowls are so, essentially it was the equivalent of the disposable fast food takeout containers you get from McDonald's or Burger King or whatever. That's how they identify a site from that particular period. They've been found all over ancient Iraq and Syria because those bowls were used to give the workers and the soldiers their daily dole of grain from the central government. So now how do we transplant that into the modern day here in the United States? We are now talking about, we've got legislation that's been proposed in the House of Congress, House of Representatives, and in the Senate by Democrats to extend the economic relief from a one-time $1,200 payout to $2,000 per month for everyone age 16 and over until the Department of Health and Human Services decides that this crisis is over, which is when we have a vaccine. Well, as you said, they say they're going to rush it through in 18 months. President Trump is hoping to get it with Project Warp Speed by the end of this year. But I'll tell you what, if they get it done that quick, ain't no way it's going in my veins. So we're looking at, though, the procedure. If it's not this, if it's not this crisis, Mark, I think it's something that will look a lot like this at some point in the future, where people are so frightened, and we can see a difference between the way people are responding to this. I think that there are some who are going too far in the direction of saying this is all fake, because I think there is a clear public health threat from this virus, but it's not, as you rightly point out, not what Neil Ferguson and his group at Imperial College originally proposed. We're not looking at
absolutely, and that's why I throw in those figures out.
Right.
I'm throwing those figures out. You don't just sacrifice the economy in this way.
Right. As of this recording, they had projected as many as 2.2 million deaths here in the United States if we did nothing. As of this recording, May 30th, 2020, we're at 105,000 in the United States. The UK, 38,376 as of this recording. So considerably lower than what was projected. But if we go back 100 years and look at the way we responded, and the UK responded, and everyone else in the world responded, acknowledging that World War I was ongoing, and so there was a limit to how far you could lock down your society. But here in the United States, we didn't suffer the economic impact of the Spanish flu, which is arguably much deadlier than COVID-19, because we didn't push the economy off the cliff to try to stop it. But acknowledging again, World War I was ongoing. But the point is, we didn't shut the economy down. And so we didn't have to put everybody on the grain dole.
Yeah.
And we didn't have people demanding it. This idea of universal basic income, which would have been laughable in the United States 50 years ago, is now being seriously considered and being promoted and pushed by Democratic legislators at the national level. And I suspect we're going to see this around the world. It's like, well, we got to do something. These poor people, because of the pandemic, they just can't go to work. So you're just creating free money, quote unquote, throwing it out there, as you said, helicoptering it in. And as the poet Juvenal said, or wrote 2,000 years ago, around 100 AD, in describing the reaction of the people under the Roman Empire and how they had abandoned their responsibilities as citizens. They shed their sense of responsibility long ago when they lost their votes. The mob that used to grant power, high office, allegiance, everything, curtails its desires and reveals its anxiety for two things only: bread and circuses. And that is where we are in the modern United States.
We are. And here's, we voted to leave the EU, and then it's like we've just walked into the New World Order.
Yep.
That's why it was so, on a personal level, so difficult. It's taken me a while to get my head around that and go, oh my goodness, this is what they are then trying to push. We then have, Hitler as the Third Reich, as far as I'm concerned. The European Union, to some listening to this who are Remainers, would be highly offended, but we could briefly go through history, is that's the Fourth Reich. And now, to me, this is like the Fifth Reich. They are building the social credit score system. That's what they want to try and do across the world that China has. Mm-hmm. That's what they are doing. That's why 5G, etc., 6G, 7G, YG, that's why all of this is important. That's why all of this is important. Now I know it has other things in regard to that, in regard to entities and stuff that they want to bring back. That's another subject in that sense. But there is all of this to throw into the mix, all of it to throw into the mix in regard to the flu vaccination that people had, which I believe has damaged people's immunity. Did they have a low immunity in the first place? It's very interesting when you say about the figures here. Matt Hancock revealed that they were counting the figures twice. The other thing is that we have had death certificates. I've known this anecdotally. I've been told this. Oh, they've died from COVID-19, and people have gone, no, they've died of a heart attack. Mm-hmm. They've died of cancer. That has come out. So I'm sorry, I don't fully accept these figures, because everyone is going, oh, it's got to be COVID-19. For you in America, it's like, oh, you'll get 13,000 for saying it's COVID-19. And then if you put them on a ventilator, it's another $39,000 and all this kind of thing. And then, as I know anecdotally from a friend of mine who involved in the medical services on your side of the pond, said suddenly we had all this money given to us, $5 million given to us. What are we supposed to do with it? Oh, shall we invent this or do this? Excuse me? If you're given that and you can't use it, maybe it should be handed back to the government. But you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Derek. With this whole thing of track and trace, which is like, Stasi and the KGB would love it. We've got that. We've then suddenly the whole thing of federalism. I mean, the European Union is a socialist Marxist construct, majorly influenced by the CIA. And yes, I did say that. And all of these things. And I think maybe as we're coming up to running out of time, and maybe we should take this in another direction on another occasion. But when we're talking about Ephesians 6, when we're talking about principalities and powers and how they're rolling out, we look at the industrial complex of IG Farben, that conglomerate, that cartel that backed Hitler of the basically the pharmaceutical industry. Then this whole thing about who owns the process of production. Within you have this discussion within communism. It's so obviously the government does, and then they turn around and say, "Well, that's fascism because it's the means of production, is private enterprise." But hold on a minute, the people running IG Farben were, members of the Nazi Party and all this kind of thing. Then we run through as other dear friends of ours are bigger experts than me on this, and we run through the Second World War. We look at what the Nazis said, where they got all their technology from the other side, from occult practices, from a fallen angel technology. Then we have Operation Paperclip. That comes into your nation. This whole reason why I'm saying this is corporate fascism. Corporate fascism. This is what we are dealing with, where IG Farben that produced Cyclone B, that disgustingly killed 5 or 6 million Jews in Dachau, Auschwitz, etc. Right? And the fact that you then have IBM, you've got links where Bill Gates' mother has links in the past, had links with IBM, and they had worked out all the tattoos and the clocking in system and all the rest, and the fact that IBM, the then person there during the war, was running, I think had put a typewriting factory into Poland on behalf of Hitler and was running all of this organization for him. IG Farben then has its own factory inside Auschwitz. You've heard me mention that in the past. So there's all these things, fantastic books. I think Hell's Cartel and all of these other books. There's all this information that is out there. Why am I saying that? Well, you've had a practice on 5 or 6 million people. Now you want to practice on the world. And then you look at people like Bill Gates. His father was a banker. His father then sat on the board of Planned Parenthood. Margaret Sanger, eugenics. And sadly, that is where that ethos came from America. That influenced, Hitler's thinking and all the rest. But the way the spirits morph and morph and morph and morph generationally. And then we have to remind ourselves that in 1949, the American State Department, because it was full of a number of Marxists and Trotskyists and all the rest, then shafted the person that supporting during the Second World War, and basically handed China over to Mao. And all of these things have to be borne in mind. We have to remember what people like Henry Kissinger have said over many, many years. We have to remember how then encouraging Nixon to open up, discussions with China. And the fact is as our dear friend Jamie Warden has talked about, that it's a 4th generation war that China are having on America, that they're having on the West.
Yeah.
It's not about bombing us. It's about because they would like, as they bought up so much of America, so much over here, as they want all the infrastructure in place. And just quickly say this. The reason why this whole row of Huawei is so important is because Huawei is a global spy agency.
Yep.
As far as I'm concerned. And no, we don't have any links with Beijing. What? You're having a laugh. You're a communist country. Do me a favor. Now, all of these things are linked in regard to what has happened with the Second World War, how the EU came about. We then have Dulles, as our dear friend, mutual friend Kevin Shipp talks about, where I remember him describing to me, plus it's in the Out of the Shadows documentary, where Dulles then was friends with Heinrich Himmler.
Mm-hmm.
And he was friends with Nazis.
Yep.
So it's no wonder that a load of scientists ended up coming back. And no wonder that a V2 rocket is actually fired on, out of America. I mean, which is just disbelieving in many ways. None of that history is properly taught, and it's not taught over here.
That's something I'd never heard before. A V2 rocket fired from? I'm
certain a V2 rocket, a book, a wonderful book, I think, called Anna Jacobsen, on Operation Paperclip. I think there's photographs in the book that actually show that. And of course.
Yes. We've got that book, in fact, and I've interviewed Annie Jacobsen.
Yeah, I think it's in there, right? Because I've got the book somewhere.
Okay.
It's in there. And again, it's really, I'll just say this, it's really, really important that we name all these people. We name where we've got our research from.
Yes.
Because it's really important, because we want people to go and read it. We want people to dig all this out. Look at the stuff that we've been looking to, and that's a fantastic book. So I'm certain that they did that. And of course, it's this whole thing of who was head of Hitler's, rocketry, and then he ends up being in America and all the rest.
Werner von Braun,
Vernon von Braun. So all of this, and this is so relevant because it's spiritually what the enemy has been doing and planning, where, Bill Gates Bill and Melinda Gates, you're handing out all this money. I'm stepping down from being involved in Microsoft. I made a mistake of going on Epstein's Lolita Express. Oh, really? And then someone was arrested around your vicinity who's got all these disgusting photos of young children or whatever on their computer, and they were either in your employment. Yeah. I think, what is all the accusation of? What is all this about? And getting away with this, but he does not have any medical, any certificates whatsoever. And also the head of the World Health Organization. But all he is a Marxist. But look at how we then have gone to China. We have pushed all our a vast majority of our manufacturing into China, as you have found out, because where, in regard to medically, the whole thing of the New World Order set up. And what's that? Now, you asked a really, really important question at the beginning, which is, where is the hope? Right?
Yeah.
You said that. Where is our hope? Well, I'm going to say this on a personal level. On a personal level, it has fired me up to turn around and say, wherever I can, and sometimes, of course, it's not easy. I had a bit of an argument with someone about that today. Is to turn around and say, look, the answer is Jesus. You need to, if you are not right with Christ, you need to sort that out right now. Right? Our priority of preaching the gospel is paramount, is number one. I mean, over here, I will say this, the Archbishop of Canterbury, I'm not a fan, has not asked for a day of prayer or a day of repentance. Something like that has happened through another group today. I haven't heard him talk about that. Maybe about, diversity issues or whatever. I am being deliberately sarcastic, because this is just outrageous. And the fact that, can we open churches and may not be able to sing or, blah, blah. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But that's the priority. The hope is that suddenly we are seeing things unfold before our eyes that must mean that we have to have a sense of urgency of going about. I'm talking to me, Derek. I am really talking to myself, of going about our Father's business.
Amen.
I don't think, and it's funny, I sort of have quite an emotional reaction in saying that, because certain things are not a priority anymore. If we are not changed through this experience, individually and corporately, then we have a problem. And even within our own community, and we're not saying that we're anything special. In fact, when I start to talk, people think I'm a bit of a bore, to quote an ABBA song. But the comment is this, is that within, we believe that there is a remnant body. We don't want it to be exclusive. We don't preach that exclusivity. We want every single person within it. And it grieves us when we see the state of the church, when we see the falling away and we see the apostasy and all the rest. But we know what Scripture says, and the Lord has, God has said that this is what will happen, that we, as the 7 letters to the churches, the Church of Laodicea, we are in that time. And people over here, I have to say, they haven't cottoned on to the fact that the churches, those letters are laid out in a particular way. So the hope I want to give is to say that we really, really need to be about our Father's business, using all the different skills and talents that we have to the best of our ability, and asking Him and saying, what do you want us to do now? Because that really is the priority in having the conversations. And there is no doubt about it. People are waking up over here. There are other dear friends of mine where we're having, praise God, some incredible conversations. We really are. So I don't know if that is helpful, but that is the hope that I want to say, because I think it's about motivation, my brother.
Absolutely. As Jesus told the disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few, and time is growing short. While we have daylight, let us get out there and work. Mark Sutherland is a film director and producer. His website, marksutherland.org. Most recently, The Iris Echo, which is available on Vimeo now, and highly recommended. Excellent short film that also has some very interesting and important life lessons embedded as well. Mark, thank you for your time, and we look forward to talking again soon. We'll have to do this more frequently, and also seeing you again face to face.
It's an absolute privilege, Derek. I look forward to doing that, and I definitely look forward to seeing you face to face. We need international flight back immediately.
Amen. Mark Sutherland online at marksutherland.org, marksutherland.org. The link is in the show notes at vftb.net. Coming up, some thoughts on the protests around America and what should be the greatest scandal in academic publishing in recent memory. And it deals with COVID-19. That's ahead on A View from the Bunker.
The Book of Enoch is one of the most influential and historically relevant books in history. And now, for the first time, you'll be able to comprehend the book's content with greater insight and clarity than ever before. Skywatch TV is proud to announce the companion to the Book of Enoch Special Collection. When you order the brand new companion to the Book of Enoch Reader's Commentary Volume 1 by Dr. Michael S. Heiser, you'll also receive his best-selling book, Reversing Hermon. This groundbreaking work unveils what most of the modern church has never heard regarding how the sin of the watchers in Enoch 6 through 16 helped frame the mission of Jesus, how the descriptions of the Antichrist, the end times day of the Lord, and the final judgment connect to Genesis 6 and the Nephilim. This and so much more. Plus, you'll also receive on DVD The Book of Enoch, Fallen Angels, and Ancient Aliens, an exclusive production with Dr. Michael Heiser regarding the blatant lies of ancient astronaut theory and the horrifying nature of fallen angels and alien abduction. But that's not all. You'll also receive the beautifully printed hardback edition of the original historical Book of Enoch from Defender Publishing, perfect for assisting serious researchers and students in the study of the Bible and the early age. Sold separately, this special collection retails for $120. Yours now for only $35 plus shipping and handling. So whether you've read the Book of Enoch before or perhaps want to journey through it for the first time ever, without a doubt you'll find this resource enormously enlightening. So don't delay. Order the companion to the Book of Enoch Special Collection now. Available at skywatchtvstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985.
Talking the Walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. We're online at vftb.net. The easiest way to follow us is to download our free mobile app. We've got an app for Android, and iOS, both. You'll find the links in the right-hand column, one of the right-hand columns at vftb.net. Follow us on social media, Twitter at View from Bunker, or my personal feed at Derek Gilbert. That's where I post most of the stuff that deals with news. I'm trying to limit Facebook use to more social stuff, friends, family, and whatnot. Also on Parler.com, Parler, maybe you say parlor. It is French, Parler.com. You find me there under Derek P. Gilbert. This past week, it came to light that the two most prestigious journals, academic journals in the field of medicine, the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine, had published a study back at the end of May on the use of hydroxychloroquine for treating the coronavirus, COVID-19, and found that the patients who took it actually had a much higher rate of death, a much greater chance of dying from cardiac arrest than those who were not on it. And because of this, the World Health Organization and a number of national governments, including France, among others, immediately stopped all tests, all trials with hydroxychloroquine. It's too dangerous, they said, because of this study that was published in these academic journals. And the study purportedly used data from 700 hospitals around the world to draw these conclusions. Now, again, the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet are the gold standard for academic journals in the field of medical research. If they're published there, these peer-reviewed journals, it is accepted as most likely true, which is why the World Health Organization, which we've been hearing since the beginning of this outbreak, is the organization to which we must listen. And in fact, social media sites were taking down any posts, any comments that deviated from the official line being published by the World Health Organization. President Donald Trump was widely ridiculed in the mainstream media for questioning the World Health Organization and for threatening to withhold American funding. And by the way, as of this recording on June 6th, this past week, the president has said the United States is going to withdraw from the World Health Organization. And now, in the wake of this scandal, and scandal is the correct word, the president looks like a genius. Because it turns out that the company that provided the data upon which this study was based is tiny. And by tiny, I mean non-existent. The LinkedIn profile for this company called Surgisphere, 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 listed 6 employees last week. As of this week, that number was down to 3, but when you go to the LinkedIn page, there were only 2. Okay. Now, one of the employees, it appeared, she was listed as the marketing director, actually appeared to be a model, a lingerie model. Okay. As of this recording, the 2 employees who remain at the LinkedIn site for Surgisphere include the CEO and a second gentleman who was listed as the science editor, except science was misspelled. It was spelled S-C-O-E-N-C-E, Scoence editor. And the Scoence editor appears to have died in March of 2018, according to his obituary. Dun & Bradstreet, which is the company that tracks the valuation of companies and rates them according to, basically compiles information. When you need to find out something about a corporation in America, you go to Dun & Bradstreet. When we at Skywatch TV have to do something where we apply for a corporate account, for example, at Apple or with Google to develop the web app for Skywatch TV, we needed to provide a Dun & Bradstreet number. Okay. The D&B estimate of the value of Surgisphere was less than $50,000. Now, an expert who looked into this, and by expert, I mean somebody in the medical field, but this was one guy operating on his own. This was not an investigative journalist per se. This was some guy who looked at the results of this study published by the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet and found that the numbers didn't add up. For one thing, the number of people who purportedly died in Australia was greater than the number of people officially listed as sick with COVID-19. So the numbers didn't make sense. He also pointed out that the type of database work that Surgisphere allegedly does with 700 hospitals around the world would cost, in terms of setup infrastructure, about $1 million per hospital. So where's all that money gone? If this company is only worth 50 grand, less than 50 grand, and only has 2 employees, one of whom is deceased as of 2 years ago. Something doesn't smell right here. And once this began to be pointed out by the doctor who took to Twitter to express his concerns, then the media started to take note. The Guardian in the UK, among others, the Spectator, the Telegraph in Australia, they began to look into this and said, you know what? You're right. This really doesn't add up at all. And because of this, both the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet withdrew the papers. So now the question is, look, if one guy, albeit he knew what he was looking at, but one guy operating on his own could poke holes in this and say, hey, there are no clothes on this guy. Forget the emperor's new clothes. There are no clothes on this Surgisphere company. And yet somehow the 2 most prestigious academic journals in the field of medicine, whose word should be unquestioned, and upon which the World Health Organization immediately withdrew any recommendation for even testing hydroxychloroquine, much less prescribing it as a treatment for the coronavirus, changed policy. National governments changed policy because of this. How is this paper accepted for publication by these journals? How did this happen? The reviewers are now saying, we didn't actually see the data. Really? Well, why not? Isn't that what you're supposed to do in a peer-reviewed situation? I've not had anything published in an academic journal, so I don't really know the process. Now, Sharon has. And that's kind of the assumption that when a journal accepts a paper for publication, runs it through peer review, it's checked by experts in the field to make sure that the information is correct, that the experiment was conducted correctly, that the math appears to add up, that somebody's not just making stuff up. And yet that appears to be exactly what happened in this hydroxychloroquine study. And I will repeat, because of the reputation of these journals, the World Health Organization and national governments stopped testing hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for SARS-CoV-2. So there are a lot of questions that come out of this. This should be a huge scandal because it begs a lot of questions. First of all, how many other papers published by these journals and other journals with lesser reputations are just rubber stamped? They're not really checked. They're accepted for publication on the basis of, we assume that these authors did their due diligence. We assume the experiment was conducted correctly. We don't really know. But it's sort of like a trade secret, just nudge, nudge, wink, wink. How much of what passes for settled science is really settled? This really is, in fact, I'm not the first one to ask this question. This is something Sharon and I have talked about on Sci Friday a couple of times in the past. It's called the reproducibility crisis. In certain fields, researchers have found that if fewer than 40% of published papers can be reproduced, in other words, the results of experiments that are published in peer-reviewed journals, fewer than 40% in some fields can be reproduced. That's a lot. More than half of the published studies in certain fields turn out to be either flawed, and it's even worse when and I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I should have prepared for this because I'm just kind of riffing off the cuff here. But in certain fields of medicine, or not medicine, but in certain fields of science, according to a survey done by scientists in various fields, a surprisingly high number say, either I have fudged research or I know of colleagues who have fudged research in order to get papers published. There's a lot of pressure on academics working in for colleges and universities to get papers published. That's how you get tenure. It's how you establish yourself in a career. And it's why when guys reach a certain conclusion on something, get a paper published, they will defend that position to the death in the face of contrary evidence or dissenting opinions. because it's about their personal reputation. It's not really about establishing the truth of the matter. It's about personal careers. I mean, all of us have a personal stake in various things, and we see this. We see this happen among Christians too. Some of us who are willing to defend a theory regarding the timing of the end times to the death, if necessary. And I raise my hand here because, again, my personality is such that I enjoy a good argument and a good debate, and sometimes it can go too far. But in this case, again, we're looking at a proposed treatment for a disease based on a widely available and generic drug that's been used for half a century, and it's cheap. And suddenly, because of the publication of this study, and I'll use this phrase again, the two most respected academic journals in the field of medicine, suddenly, we can't use this. It's deadly. It's dangerous. And President Trump is crazy and a fool and an idiot for pushing it and promoting it. And it turns out that the study was bogus, and the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet published it anyway. And right now, President Trump looks like a genius. But like I said, the first question that comes to mind is how much of what we believe is accepted science, because it's been published in academic journals, is fake. The second question that's even more important, at least in this specific instance, why was this bogus study published? Who wanted to discredit the use of hydroxychloroquine? A lot of potential answers out there. No smoking gun, so I'm not going to speculate. But again, the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, wrote the Apostle Paul. And as we record this, not only have we got that going on, which has turned the world upside down over the last 6 months, as this weekend unfolds, protests taking place in more than 140 cities across America, maybe more than that now, because I know Springfield, Missouri, which is less than an hour from where I sit, is closing down part of the downtown area for a permitted protest. And many of these protests are peaceful, and you can understand why certain communities are upset at the way police have carried out their duties. But outside of those communities, Minneapolis, Louisville, where an EMT, African-American woman, was shot dead in her apartment by police executing a no-knock warrant earlier this year. Aside from those communities, some of the communities where the protests are taking place, you have to scratch your head. Is there really a problem here, or is there something else going on? And as we see news reports over this past week of police intelligence units coming up with information of a command and control structure that goes way beyond anything they've seen in previous protests following the Rodney King death in Los Angeles, 1992, following the deaths of Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown, Freddie Gray. Police said, we didn't see anything like this. We're seeing caches of projectiles dropped near the locations of planned protests. Maybe you've seen some of this on social media. Pallet loads of bricks being dropped near a protest site or a planned protest site when there's no construction nearby. Bottles, frozen water, things like that. Encrypted communications, telling people when and where to go. Social media being used to generate flash mobs. And of course, the opportunists or anarchists who are deliberately destroying property, which has nothing to do with protesting the death of a man in police custody. This past week, I also reported on some information that doesn't fit the narrative, and I'll just put this out there. An economist at Harvard, whose name is Fryer, and I'm forgetting his first name, sadly. He's published a couple of studies that really go against the grain regarding police brutality and violence. It's Roland Fryer. 3 years ago, he published a study showing that contrary to what you might think if you just listen to the mainstream media or get your information off of social media, police in America today are actually far more likely to fire upon an Anglo suspect than on an African American suspect. I will repeat, on a per capita basis, in terms of number of arrests, when you look at the number of arrests of white suspects and black suspects, the number of times that police will fire are likely to fire on a white suspect as opposed to a black suspect is higher. That doesn't fit with what the media has been telling us. It doesn't fit with what we see from the mobs out there. It certainly doesn't fit with what politicians are saying. But numbers don't lie. And I suppose we can question the numbers, I suppose, but this comes, from the FBI and local police departments across the country. Anyway, he published the study 3 years ago. Now, Roland Fryer is himself an African American. In fact, he was the youngest African American to ever receive tenure at Harvard. So this is not somebody and Harvard, I think it's safe to say, is not a conservative institution. It is far left, generally speaking, in its politics. Most of the faculty there are very liberal in their beliefs. And yet several years ago, Dr. Fryer published this study. And perhaps coincidentally, last summer he was accused of sexual harassment by a personal assistant about whose work he had repeatedly complained. And Harvard had been trying to get rid of her anyway, according to an investigation by Real Clear Investigations. New York Times reported on the story. Real Clear Investigations found that the New York Times, not surprisingly, left a lot of information out of their report on the accusations. Interestingly, that one of the people mentioned by the New York Times as the friend of the woman who made the accusation against Fryer is actually Fryer's co-author of a forthcoming paper that is about to be published, and this was reported on by the Wall Street Journal this past week, which is what led me down this road of looking at Dr. Fryer and his work. Fryer and his co-author, whose name is Tanaya Devi, are about to publish a study that shows that in the aftermath of a violent incident between police and an African American suspect, an incident that goes viral, that is, like George Floyd or Freddie Gray or Trayvon Martin, and of course we know that wasn't a police incident, but still, or Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. After an incident like that, the police tend to back off. They tend to back off from the community. And so what Dr. Fryer and Ms. Devi did was look at the crime rate in those communities in the aftermath of those very highly publicized incidents. And they found that the number of felonies and murders spiked in those communities. And according to Fryer, by his estimate, there may have been as many as 1,000 additional lives lost. And most of those would be Black Americans, because the police backed away and weren't policing the way they had previously because of the sensitivity of the situation in the aftermath of a very highly publicized incident. So what may come of this wave of protests and rioting across the country is police backing away from engaging with those communities. And it's going to be worse for those communities if Fryer is correct in his conclusions. If the data that he assembled is correct, things will get worse in those communities and not better, because those who are going to break the law and take advantage of their fellow humans will see the window of opportunity. So the bottom line here is, regardless of which side of this issue you're on, we need to recognize that there are principalities and powers at work here. That's really what this is about. I talked on Skywatch TV earlier this week about the hidden forces at work behind the outrage. And I got a number of emails back saying, yeah, that's right, it's George Soros. No, it's not George Soros. George Soros is a useful idiot. As Christians, we need to remember what Paul wrote in Ephesians 6:12, which is why I close with this phrase every week. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. The human opponents, they're not the real enemy here. They're dupes. And sadly, They're in bondage and they don't even recognize it. It's the principalities and powers and the cosmic rulers over this present darkness who are the enemy behind them. We may never reach the people who are out there smashing windows and stealing, taking advantage of this situation, exploiting old wounds in our civilization, in our culture, for their own benefit. We may never, but it is our mission as Christians to try. And we can't do that if we're only looking, if we see the humans on the front lines as the true enemy. They are, in a very real way, human shields. Human shields between us and the real enemy, which are those principalities and powers. In fact, I've kind of modified my talk a bit from the True Legends Conference, and will be presenting it with a little sharper focus for the Battle Ready Conference coming up in just a couple of weeks, because I think the spirit of chaos is behind this. And we think the spirit of chaos is an entity that is mentioned in the Bible. I will go into some detail in that for the Battle Ready Conference, and also in a forthcoming book Sharon and I are working on. We had planned to write that this year, and we, after talking with Tom Horn, we got into a couple of other projects, but that will be out next year. And this is connected to the research that we've done in the Golan, on the Golan Heights near Gilgal Rephaim. And we hope to get back there later this year to do more research, because we think there's archaeological evidence there of this very ancient struggle that predates Eden. And we think that's the spirit that's behind what's going on here. I mean, look, when you've got 140 cities or more in the United States where protests are taking place, many of those protests turning violent, okay, that's hard enough to accept as just a random, spontaneous uprising. But when you see this spreading across the world, when you see protests taking place in Europe, in Asia, South America, Australia, New Zealand, Athens, Greece, where protesters were throwing Molotov cocktails at the American embassy there, ostensibly in the name of George Floyd. Really? Really? Greece has other problems to worry about right now. The country is darn near bankrupt. The European Union was trying to impose some real draconian austerity measures on the country, and Erdogan next door in Turkey is trying to flood their country with more refugees, quote unquote, from Syria. They've got things to worry about other than the way unarmed suspects, African-American suspects, are being treated by the police in the United States. There's more at work coordinating this that we don't see, and it's not George Soros. He's the tool being used by the real coordinators of this. Pray for our nation and pray for our world, because we are really, really in some very strange times. Come quickly, Lord Jesus. We got a calendar of our events at gilberthouse.org, gilberthouse.org, and that includes all of the upcoming conferences, including the Battle Ready Conference, which is the final weekend of this month. Don't miss that one. Russ Dizdar, Carl Gallups, Brandon Gallups, Rabbi Zeph Porat, Pastor Casper McLeod, Stephen Bankhars, other speakers. Sharon and I will be recording our presentations for that within the next couple of days. And there will be an announcement coming very soon about the Skywatch TV Defender Conference in late August. We got to get final confirmation on some information, but I expect we will have an announcement about the Defender Conference within the next week or so. So keep an eye on skywatchtv.com for that. But for the other things that we're involved with, Sharon and me, check out gilberthouse.org. And that's always a good place to look, because that's where we post our weekly Bible study every Sunday morning. So by the time you're hearing this, it's already up and online. We've been through the Bible all the way one time already, and we're back in the book of Genesis and going through it in chronological order. And again, all of our, it's kind of the web hub for what we do, gilberthouse.org. A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House and released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Our opening theme is Iron Bacon by Kevin MacLeod, his website incompetech.com. Our announcer is DC Good. Remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.